What is up, everyone? Welcome to episode 2. It goes without saying, if you have not seen episode 1, then go and check it out. Okay, let's carry on with this build. So the first thing we are going to do is actually undo a lot of what we did in the last episode. We've got the test bench up and running, so we've proven that both PSUs work at least well enough to get us to this stage, and all of the key components work: motherboard, CPU, RAM, and storage. I think you'll all be delighted to hear that it is finally time to try and test fit some of this into the Beige case. So let's rip this apart and make space for the case itself. Here she is. So the basic plan is to remove all paneling from the case, because this is going to be such a densely packed build. We will need access to all areas of the case. And the first part that I'm going to put in is going to come as quite a surprise, but due to the way that I want to try and squeeze all this in, we're going to have to kind of start from the front and work our way back at the bottom here. So the very first component we're going to need to test fit is in fact the intake 80mm fan. We need to find out where that guy is going to go. Is it going to go inside the front bezel here? Will it fit in between the chassis and the front cover itself? Or is it going to have to take up valuable space inside the case? Which I'm really hoping it doesn't, because it's going to be a tight squeeze in there. I have no idea if this is just my imagination, but I've left this case here for weeks, just sitting in the sunlight from the skylight above, and I am convinced that the front panel is looking ever so slightly more yellowed than it was when I originally got it. It's probably my imagination. I don't think it can happen that quickly, but it is certainly looking very good to me. Okay, main side panel, little accessory kit. Take this out as well for now. We're gonna need to do some test fitting with that. As I explained in the case video, we want to try and retain all of these things in the case. We want to chop up as little as possible. And I did decide to keep the crazy audio pass-through thing just for the authenticity of the case. So we're not even going to change that. We're keeping the separate USB pins, USB front header pins. Okay, backside. So we want to take this front panel off, ideally, but we do need to keep it handy. Okay, that crack at the top is getting worse. I've got to be really careful with that. We need to repair that ASAP. So there's all our front panel connectors, they stay in place. So throughout the whole build, our front panel is going to stay here pretty much, because these pass-through cables feed right the way through to the PCIe bracket. And unless we take that, oh no, we could probably fit that bracket through the front of the case, but we'll leave it for now because we need to test fit. Now what I'm really hoping is that I can get an 80mm fan in the front of the case here. It is going to be tight. Yeah, I want to put the fan this side so that I don't lose space this side, which will make a lot of sense. Let me grab the fan. So we are going to look a little something like this, if that is at all possible. And then getting that back on. Do you know what, guys? I'm going to give that a go. Let's find some fan screws. So here is a packet of lovely fan screws. Worth noting that buying an 80mm fan from Evercase, you do not receive the screws. Now we're actually kind of breaking the laws of physics here a little bit, because the way that these grills are designed is there's an indent this way through the case that way, so that the fan has space to breathe. You can screw it tight against the case and there is space here. The grill is set back, say 2 or 3 mil from the case itself. So when we put the fan this side, we're actually going to be pulling the fan as close as possible to the case when we screw it in, but there is still going to be a gap between the main frame of the fan and the case itself. We've just got to hope that nothing actually scrapes on the case side. We've got to be careful about the cabling. So this is going to be quite fiddly, but once we've got a couple of screws in, it should get a bit easier. Okay, let's get that loosely held with one screw and then go into the opposite corner. Another thing that's not very easy about this is obviously we're creating the threads as we go with these screws. Okay, so that has mounted beautifully, really nicely. So the idea is to feed the fan cable back into the system so that we can plug it in, let's feed this USB back through that I kind of prematurely pulled out. So popping the front panel back on, moment of truth, does she fit? And let's keep an eye on our cabling so that we're not getting anything caught in the fan. Yes! Sweet, okay, that is brilliant. So what we now have is our lovely intake, but it's not taking up a huge amount of space in the case. It is out of the way. Now granted, the airflow will be ever so slightly less because even though we do have these cutouts here, the fan is now incredibly close to these cutouts. It no longer has this inch and a half of gap that the front panel occupies. It is right there. So it's going to need to collect as much air as it can from underneath and this vent, but it should still blow some air as an intake. Obviously, when we power the system up, if there's zero airflow, we can always change that. But it's going to make our lives a lot easier if we can have the fan out of the way in the front of the case there. So with that little experiment done, we can leave the fan on. There we go. Yeah, the panel does definitely close. Didn't realize that top corner wasn't actually in, but yeah, no, that's fine. I'm going to pull this front panel off again. Oh, I don't like doing that too much because this crack at the top is... Ooh. Yeah, we're going to need to sort that. Okay, let's get this panel completely out of the way. Let's pull the cabling out. And my plan is with this guy is we should just be able to feed it back through the hole at the front of the case. Should go through. Put that back in, because we may not put in that pass-through into the same place anyway at the back. That is really cool, guys. I was getting ready to wangle the PCI blanking plate here back through the front cover, but it just sits in there like that. Yeah, check that out. That is really cool. So yeah, we can put that slot cover back. Let's pull this out of the way. So that now comes out no problem, meaning we can get our front panel out of harm's way completely. Let's pop this back into place then before that goes walkies. Brilliant. Okay, cool. That has worked out wonderfully. Another little note, if you guys didn't see the case video right to the very end, I did put the feet on in the, not the previous episode, but the video before that where I took an overview of the case because I scratched up my desk really badly with the feet off, which was really annoying. So I know to do that straight away next time if I ever buy another one of these. So that is actually pretty sweet as well because the cabling from the power button, power LED board here, that just neatly bypasses the fan completely and goes straight in there. There's no danger of anything getting caught. So that looks really nice. Let's see if we can get this top panel off, which looks riveted on. Yes, it is. So that is actually brownie points lost for the case. I don't like that at all. I should be able to take that off. Yeah, case definitely loses points for that. To give ultimate freedom when putting a complex system together, it's really nice just to get rid of the top panel there. I'm not really a big fan of the fact you can't take that off, but that's fine. You could of course drill them out, screw the panel back in, but that's really unnecessary. It was just going to give us a little bit of extra breathing room. We don't necessarily need it. Right, we need to get this motherboard in here so that we can test fit our main components. For that, we will need the I/O shield. Have a little look and see what we've got. So we've got one of these rather nice black I/O shields. Ooh, nice. And it's got the little MSI logo there on the I/O shield. Not a massive fan of this I/O shield. The tabs are very, very tabby, and the colouring is non-standard. I don't like it when they do that. I don't understand why the back of the I/O shield needs to be aesthetically pleasing, but there we go. That's coming from a man that is worried about the aesthetics of the way the PSU looks at the back of the case. Needs it to look like something straight out of 1996, so that's not really a problem. I won't moan too much about MSI's choice to do that to the I/O shield. So there's the I/O shield in place. Let's try and get rid of that fan cable for just a minute so that we can look at where we are with these standoffs. Now, it looks to me like we have possibly too many here. Okay, yes, there are a few here we don't need. We do not need you. Oh, they're in there pretty good. We don't need this guy either. Ah, Thomas, you've taken one out unnecessarily. First test fit of the crazy modern gaming board in the beige case. Let's find ourselves some motherboard screws. So in the bag you get additional standoffs, which is nice, and you get additional... What are these for then? What did I take those out of? It's something to do with the case. Those loose screws in there. I wonder what they were for. Anyway, yeah, you get additional standoffs and you get the fan screws, guys, so that's pretty nice. So I'm just going to have a little screw party over here for a second. I suppose with this just being a test fit, we don't really need to put all the motherboard screws in. Let's put a few in so that we can stand the case up at least. And we're going to need enough in here to hold the GPU as well, or putting unnecessary flex on the board or anything like that. So we'll get a few of them in. Get one in down the bottom corner there, and then we'll put the GPU straight in. In a normal kind of everyday build, I'd put the GPU in as one of the last components, but it is vital to put it in now. And I'll tell you guys why in a minute. Bye-bye slot covers. Hello RX 580. What do we prefer? Beige case slot covers or the RX 580? Fairly tough competition. Yeah, one thing that's interesting is when you start building in the case, you can then get to the next level of assessing the quality. So I'm seeing now as I'm screwing the GPU in that it's pulling the back panel this way. So the GPU, the way the motherboard is sitting, the GPU needs to pull ever so slightly, just a millimeter or maybe even half a millimeter. Just needs to pull the back of the chassis in on itself a little bit just to properly align. Yeah, and this is where the GPU anti-sag bracket comes in, because the alignment isn't quite perfect between where we want the screws for the PCI slot and where the motherboard sits. So the GPU isn't 100% straight. So we can use the vertical GPU bracket. Hopefully it's got the adjustment on it that I'll need to just push the GPU up like that. But there we go. That's everything we need in the case to kind of test fit this. So now I'm going to show you guys my crazy plan. So what is all of this palaver in aid of, guys? Well, let me show you my plan. And for everyone that was saying, Tom, don't do it, man. Firstly, thank you. It was touching to see the people concerned for my safety, actually. That was really nice. And also some really sensible comments about why on earth aren't I just putting a modern PSU in here? Even down to maybe painting a black one silver, or stripping off the paint on a black PSU so that it looks silver. All completely valid. And what I thought was, when this setup inevitably dies, I mean, I hope it doesn't die, but when it does, we could easily change the PSU for a more modern one to replace whichever one of these PSUs breaks first, if they do. And yeah, we could put a modern PSU in and make it look old. Take the sleeving off the cables and whatnot. It's not something that I'd thought of at all. But a few people didn't watch quite to the very end of the episode. Yeah, of course there are better PSUs to be had, and running two PSUs is a little bit stupid, but they're not terrible PSUs. One is an FSP. An FSP is used as an OEM for many different brands of PSU, Cooler Master, Corsair, granted different models, but they're a respectable brand of PSU. And then you've got the Seasonic, which is definitely an older unit, of course, but it's still a Seasonic, so it's not going to be terrible. Trust me, it's going to be great. Anyway, on the power supply front, this is exactly why we need to do this right now, because we need to discover where we need to drill the case to mount the PSU, if we can even fit it in at all. So, my plan is to mount the Fireball in the traditional location, there, and then I plan to mount the Seasonic there. And oh my gosh, I think it will just about fit. So if we unplug the other PSU for now, get it out the way. There we go. There's our GPU PSU. Can we indeed... This is why I didn't want the fan here, guys. Can we indeed get this in here? Put a little not too crazy bend radius on the ketchup and mustard cables here and sit the PSU in the front of the system. It looks like, guys, we've got just enough space to actually do that. So to assist with mounting, I purchased the 3D printed brackets. Now the trouble with these is they are wider than I would like to be able to get this done. So this would actually be a great bracket to just hold the PSU in place. Then I could screw this into the bottom of the case. But if we take this out for just a moment, let's get rid of all these front panel connectors for now. We'll be able to squeeze those in anyway. Get rid of all of that. Cool, that's out the way. That can go round the PSU any way we want. You know why that's not fitting, guys, is because the casing on this is not aligned. Let's quickly fix that. We messed that up. We're going to be opening this up for a third time as well to clean it. But right now, we don't want to do that. That's the cleaning phase. That can come later. Right now, we are in the wild engineering phase. There we go. That's all it takes to get it lined up properly, is just to give it a little squeeze when the lid is going back down. Locks the case nicely into place. And now this 3D printed PSU mounting adapter should fit over quite nicely. Okay, that is the case sorted. Now we should find, there we go. That goes on a lot better. There we have it. So we could, in theory, slide this to a certain position on the power supply. Let's say there, for instance. And then we could squidge this in. Yes, but this is the problem we're faced with. Now, if this 3D printed mount worked in a slightly different way, if the screw holes were coming out of the mount here, we could screw in from underneath and then we could push the power supply in. Obviously, it's not designed like that because it would be very awkward to install. If you wanted to put this, let's say you were using this mount for mounting your PC components to a wall, for instance, it's much better like this because you can just hold that up against a wall, screw that in, job done. But for our purposes, it would be a little bit better if this mount was the other way. But we do get a little bit more of a tolerance back here because the motherboard tray isn't in the way. So if we slide this all the way along, let's see if we can get the PSU to fit if we've got it like that. Yeah, we actually can. It is tight, it is flipping tight, but we really, really can. And in fact, we wouldn't even need to push it over that far. Let me try and get a little bit of a better angle so you guys can see this. The motherboard tray is what's stopping us putting the PSU mount here, but there is quite a gap here where there is no motherboard tray. So we could do potentially something like that, which is actually kind of cool anyway because it's holding the PSU in the middle, and we could do that. Oh man, and that just about fits in there, which is crazy. What I would then do is, because the backside of the power supply is raised here because it's sitting on the little nubbins that push through from the case feet, I would just pack out this side with something. So we'd drill a hole there, drill a hole on the back, screw this bracket in, that holds the power supply, and then we simply pack this side so that it sits level, and otherwise it's going to do that, and that's going to look pretty nasty. We don't want that. I think that's the best way to do it. Now I do have, these two parts are meant to be used in conjunction. This is meant to be the part that you screw the side on, but I know this isn't going to fit because, screwing from the back, sorry, this is wider and it's just not fitting in the case. So we're not going to need this part at all. But this, as you can see, is going to work, which is really nice. And we can even, not creating a crazy bend radius, when we mark out these holes, we can make sure that there's a gap between the power supply and the graphics card without creating a horrible, horrible bend for this, because we need to retain this bay. So the cables need to come up, over and up into the rest of the system and then, you know, exist within the system. So if we just do a little test fit of the cabling situation. Do you know what's quite funny as well? Is it's very, very close to holes that already exist in the case, which is just peculiar, I think. It's a little bit mad that those holes are there. So that's what I might try, guys. I could even take short screws and use these middle holes to hold it in place like that. And then the beauty of that is as well, if the graphics card isn't in the system, we can slide the power supply in and out. So we can take the graphics card out, mount this, and then just slide the power supply in. That is absolutely phenomenal. It fits beautifully. I think, let me show you the screws I'm talking about because you won't be able to see. These screw holes here, no, sorry, these ones here nearly align, but they don't quite. Where's that gone? So if I was going to mount this all the way over here, look, they don't quite align, as you can see. I could use those screw holes and then screw right next to these holes, but I don't know if that will just chew up the bracket a little bit too much and then neither of the holes are going to work. So what I might try instead is coming a little bit over this way and using these holes. I can pack it with washers on the underside, find some short screws. You could even get 4 in there. Cool, I think that's the plan. That has actually gone a lot better than I expected. Fitting the power supply in there is going to be pretty easy. Sadly, I don't have time to do it today. I've now got to shoot off. Thankfully for you guys, I will be back in just a moment. But for me, I've got a few agonizing days to wait until I can work on this guy again. So at least we've got this far, we've test fitted. It is looking good. So my goal for this next little session is to try and get the PSU mounted. If I can get that in there, we are sorted. Now, I did most of the figuring out the other day. All I have to do is just get it in place and get it screwed in. I think the best place to start with that is to make ourselves some more room. We can take out the 3.5-inch drive cage. We need this out anyway because it's going to be easiest to populate this with drives when we, whoops, as I put the screwdriver straight through the middle of my monitor there. It's going to be easiest to populate this with drives when it is out of the machine. So we need it out. Let's get it out of the way. This will give us more room to work in. There's one more screw. My gosh. One screw hiding there. There we go. So that's the lovely little drive cage out of the way. That'll hold our 2 external 3.5-inch devices, the floppy and the card reader, and it'll hold our SSD with its adapter, because as you guys know, the hard drives are going up here. So what I'm going to quickly do now is get this back out the way. Okay, cool. And to give ourselves maximum room, let's take the video card back out. This can go back in pretty soon. Okay, lovely. That's such a beast. Huge. Now we're talking. Okay, so I mentioned the other day in the previous clip for you guys that I think we can mount the bracket, then we can slide the PSU in, but I realized that the motherboard could well be in the way. So if we just do a little test fit of that, because if that's the case, it's not so much a problem. It just means that we've got to screw the power supply in and the bracket at the same time. So this is going to sit here as we decided, and we can get 4 screws into the bottom of it. But then, are we going to be able to slide in the power supply? No, because the motherboard is in the way. It's not going to allow us the space to actually do that, which is fine. So we have to mark up this bracket. Then we have to slide the bracket over the PSU and then screw it in from the bottom of the case. Once it's in, we can slide the PSU back and forth to put it in the best possible position, but that is what we have to do for now. Okay, sweet. So next thing we're gonna do is see if fan screws actually fit through those holes in the case. And the reason I wanna look at using fan screws is because we can drill a very, very small pilot hole in the 3D printed bracket here, and then we can use the fan screw to create like a nice thread, and then it'll be quite strong, but yes, fan screws are too big. Okay, plan B. I'm gonna open up my lovely little secret case of screws. Where have I put that? Here we go, Maplin Finest. Back in the day, the one-stop shop you would need for all of your PC bits and bobs. We are gonna use whatever I have in here that is going to be somewhat appropriate. Nice thing about using these is I know they're going to be short enough. Lovely, okay. I'm going to use some of these hard drive screws with little rubber washers on them, because I think that will be nice. So 4 of those, that is going to do the trick. They will fit through the case beautifully, giving us adequate thread into the mount. Put one up from the bottom. Yes, that'll be absolutely plenty. Should be anyway. Okay, so we'll make a start there first. Now all I need to do is line everything up so that I mark out these holes properly. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4 holes we're aiming for, and we're aiming to get this bracket directly behind and lined up appropriately, which shouldn't be too difficult because I can see light through there. Then if I can tape the bracket in place, That is then great, and we are good. That is the bracket perfectly taped in line. So my next issue is I actually do not have a drill bit small enough to do this. I was gonna drive a tiny, tiny hole into each of these 4 positions, but I definitely don't have a drill bit small enough. I have snapped all of my small drill bits. I need to replenish those. So what I'm gonna do instead is use a small wood screw just to kind of chew up, because these machine screws, these drive screws are just flat on the end, they're not gonna cut through it. So if I just temporarily use a little wood screw to chew it up, that will do the trick just fine. Okay, sweet. So I should have done enough to mark that. Beautiful, guys. I can see a tiny, tiny hole in each of the locations on the bottom of this. So that's ideal. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm gonna need to enlarge them. We've hit the jackpot. I found another little multi-pack of drill bits in my toolkit. Yes. Does pay to have a second look sometimes. Would have been easier to drill this in place. I've already taken the bracket out now, it doesn't matter. I've got an indent for each one. So we are looking good. I have now got 2 holes, the perfect size in this little PSU mount. I haven't got all 4 holes. I'm gonna do the other 2 holes when this is in and the PSU is sat in there. I think that's the best way to do it. Just in case I've got some kind of alignment issue that's cropped up, I can then adjust that. Whereas if I do all 4 holes now, then this is pretty much useless then. I could get a second attempt, flip it round and use this side, but I would prefer to use the thicker side on the bottom. And I don't have a spare one of those that I've purchased. So next step now is to take the PSU back apart, give it a little clean, and then reattach that cable tie. Then we can marry the PSU and its new mount back together and attempt to screw it into the machine. So we're gonna be careful this time not to unplug the fan. I'm pretty sure it was unplugged anyway last time we took the lid off. I've looked back at the footage and it doesn't look like I unplug it when I pull the lid off, but I'm not 100% certain. So we'll take the lid off nice and steady this time. Okay, lovely. That fan is still plugged in. That's as out the way as I can get that to reattach this cable tie. Okay, cool, right, let me find a suitable replacement. So I've got these. I think I may need to tie 2 together. Oh, that's actually the perfect length. That's that done. Thought I'd need to link 2, but no, that length ended up being okay. Okay, so next up, I just want to try as best I can to clean a bit of this fan without unplugging it. I do not want to unplug it again. So that is definitely chewing up the kitchen towel. So I'm going to use a cloth instead, and then we can put a bit more pressure on. Yeah, there we go. That's getting us a bit more success. Okay, that is overall a little bit better. That is good enough for me for now. Let's pop this back together. Sweet as. Nice. Now let's give the overall casing just a tiny little clean up. Next mission is to get some of this stuff mounted. So we need to have the PSU fan up so that it gets some sort of airflow. We need to put this on here like so, and we need to mount this in the case. Now let's eyeball a good place. We need that a bit further down. This can be adjusted later anyway. You can see our 2 mounting holes on the bottom now. Okay, let's go with that for now. So this is going to be quite an awkward thing because we need to balance the power supply while sliding the system down to screw it in from the underside. Chuck you guys up there. Feed the screw through the hole. And okay, one is in. That was scarily easy. Let's get our other one. I don't want too much pressure on this one screw, obviously. 2 screws in. Now all I need to do is just very quickly there. I would rather try multiple times than overshoot that, most definitely. There's the 3rd in. Okay, 1 more to go. Just trying not to overshoot these things. Okay. That one is looking good as well. Last screw. 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. My gosh. Okay, let's take a look at how we're looking. Yeah. Oh man. Man. That is sweet. That is absolutely lovely. So what I think I'm gonna wanna do is slide the PSU ever so slightly this way. There we go. And then the cables will neatly come up here. Nice. Up here. I'll put a few more cable ties on them. Okay, nice. That is looking really good. So we've got the power supply sloping that way a little bit, and that's because the case feet are under this side. So it's pushing that side up. Because I've screwed it down so tight, I can't pack it out this end. So what I want to do now is just for a sanity check, put the GPU back in. I know that I can't access these two SATA ports, but we've got 4 SATA devices, and we have 4 SATA ports available there. So that's absolutely fine. I won't be able to put the 5th and 6th SATA drive in, but you know, even the drive selection I've got anyway is overkill. So what we want to do here is just plop in the GPU just for our own sanity. We could leave the GPU back in the system anyway. We can always remove it if we need extra room. Brilliant. Clearance is great. So if I push all these back here out the way for a minute, we can kind of, yeah. That's what I can do as well. Instead of having the cables coming through the middle of the system like this huge chunk of cable, because there's a gap this side, the 3.5-inch cage comes this way, but not all the way that way because it's a smaller cage than the 5 1/4. We've got space back here to stash these additional cables, and we can just bring through what we need. And that's right next to the 24 pin as well. So that makes it really convenient. The only thing I wish I would have done is packed this end of the PSU a little bit in order to level it out. I guess I can still kind of do that if I was to back off those screws and then pack something in underneath. Do you know what I'm gonna do, guys? I'm going to use a little bit of double-sided tape, the foam style double-sided tape, not because it's sticky, but because it is the perfect height to just pack this in ever so slightly. So let me lift that. Push that in. 2 layers, I think. Boom. That has done it. That has done it. If I can just force that in. There we go. Nice. Awesome. That is the PSU mounted, guys. Wow. Now that we have that in, that is like one of the other big unknowns answered. First one was, will the system work at all with 2 power supplies? The second one was, can we get the second power supply in the case? Answer to that is, well and truly, yes we can. And it is now in there, which is awesome. And looking pretty damn good, I might add. So, the next part is a part that you've all been looking forward to, and that is the modification / butchering of the Fireball power supply. So for this, we are going to move the system out of the way for a second, and we are going to bring into the frame this guy. Okay, as it has been a little while since episode 1, I'm going to refresh you guys and remind you that this is the power supply that we are going to slightly alter in order to run this whole system from just one power cable and to be able to control both power supplies with just the one power switch, that power switch being the one on the back of this power supply. A couple of you guessed what I was going to do. I'm going to split the incoming AC between this PSU and the second one. And to do that, it is very, very straightforward. See, what's quite nice about this one is this fan wire is wrapped around everything else so it won't pull out of the board, which is nice. So all we're going to do is we are going to split this feed here. This is the AC going to the power supply. We're going to split this. We're going to tack another cable on. We're going to run an AC line out of the power supply into the other power supply. So first step for this, we're going to need a power cable. I have dug out this unused surplus to requirements IEC extension cable. We want this side, the female side of course, that is going to go into our FSP power supply. Then we want a length of this standard flex cable that'll go through the PC case into this power supply and ultimately end up by these connectors here. So lengthwise, we are going to guess it. I'm going to leave it generously long and we are going to cut it about here. This leaves us with a little male IEC tail that we don't need. Now we're going to trim off a generous portion of the sleeving to give us a nice bit of room to work with. We'll tidy this up a little with a bit of the old heat shrink here, where we've trimmed the outer sleeving. There we go. So that's nice and clean. So the basic plan is we have the outer sleeving in place and as normal throughout the PC case, just to obviously give double insulation and protection to the 230 volt electricity that is now running through the inside of the computer. But inside the power supply itself, we've stripped back and we can now appropriately run all those cables where they need to run. So we need to piggyback from the live, piggyback from the neutral, and then we just need to plop our ground to either this existing earth lug on the bottom of the PSU, or we just tap a new one in there, which might be easier. Now, that is probably not strictly necessary because the entire PC chassis is grounded because the power supply is screwed to the PC chassis. You plug the mains cable in here, this is grounded, PC is grounded, and that should in theory ground the other power supply. However, we are mounting the other power supply with a 3D printed mount, and also we've got that double-sided tape under it. It's not making excellent contact with the metal, so we are definitely going to want to rely on the actual ground wire within our 3-core flex here in order to deliver a perfect connection to ground for that secondary power supply. The other thing that I was thinking about was the exit route of the cable itself. So for this, I was hoping to originally tap the cable just out of the power supply in a different location, but there doesn't seem to be anywhere I can actually do that. There's not a lot of room because once you've got the lid on here, the fan occupies a lot of the extra space around here. So if I wanted to, say for instance, tap out here by getting the cable this way, maybe put a stuffing gland there, tap out the side, that would not actually work out because it's in the way of the fan. I can't come out the bottom because it's a bottom facing fan. Could I come out of this side? I guess I could. Come out of the lid, but then you've always got the mains cable tied through the lid, which isn't great. Plus, this cable is running super close to these cables anyway, to the low voltage side. So I'm going to risk it and just run the high voltage out the same cutout. If we add another cable tie, there, add another cable tie there, then we have our terminations in here, and we are job done. Screw the power supply back together. That is absolutely fine. Cable tie there to stop it moving around. And then that's coming out with the same place as that cabling. That is absolutely crazy. Yeah, so we'll work on that. I think first of all, a good use of our time would be to crimp an earthing lug on here. Yeah, a little bit of trial and error with these cable sizes. That's all good. Cool. So there's our little ground connection. We can just pop that through anywhere that's convenient. Could be a bit long, actually. I might have needed to trim that a bit. But yeah, there we go. There's that. Can we get it on there? I don't think so. That might not be possible. So the next thing I need to decide is how we are going to splice this neutral and this live into this cable here. We could go directly to the output side of the switch, but there's not a huge amount of room for us to solder directly on, which is a bit of a pain. If they were both at the top, then yes, but they are not. So let's start. I'm going to just kill this cable tie so that we can get a closer look at everything. So as you can see, we're coming out of the IEC inlet here, up into the supply side, live, neutral, and then out of the load side here, which is live neutral. So I think the easiest thing for us is to actually cut into these cables here on the load side. That way our switch will correspond and we can splice in these cables. I think that is our best choice. So no turning back now, guys. We're gonna splice straight through them. Oh, that is one sacrificed power cable. Yeah, it's far too close this side to try and get a new cable there on that side of the switch. Far too close. We're better off putting a join in. Okay, so quickest way to do this would probably be in connector blocks. But I think what's wise first is if we do our earth, because we may be a little bit in the way once we put everything else in here to actually load up this earth into an appropriate place. So I'm gonna try and get on that existing lug. If we can get under there like that, that would be incredible. But we've got to come under there first. So we're gonna come under there, then under there. There we go. So my plan now is to try and see if we can undo that nut and get onto there. We may even just be able to put a blob of solder on that. Yeah, should we try that? So progress is really sweet. We got really lucky with the earth. So as you can see, I've brought in the flex back here, I've brought the earth underneath, and there was enough space on this post here to just undo the nut, plop on the second connection, and then just do the nut back up. I couldn't get a spanner in there because it's so tight. So just a little pair of pliers did it there, needle nose, torque it round a bit. And that is nice and firm, and I've got a confirmed good earth connection all the way through the path. So if we take the new flex cable, it's going to go into the other power supply. If I touch that against the casing, we are good. And naturally, if I touch that against the actual earth pin itself, we are good. So then the next piece of progress we've got is I have terminated the incoming connections on the load side of the switch. So we've got our neutral here. I've crimped a little bootlace ferrule crimp on the end there so that we can terminate it more easily with the other connections. We're going to put ferrules on here as well. So whichever method of termination we decide on, I think it's going to be terminal blocks, to be honest, but I don't know if I've got any. I'm going to have a little look and see. I've got some Wagos, but they're for much bigger cable, which is annoying. Lovely, that's a beautiful thing. So we have those ends prepped, these ends prepped, and now those ends. So they're all going to need to meet in a junction here in the middle, so that's cool. That's those two done. Now all we've got to do is these ones. It's really easy to retain what is live and what is neutral because they look like black wires, but they're not. This is just heat shrink. So these are in fact colourful. We can see the blue and the brown. So these are the only terminal blocks I've got. I think these are something ridiculous, like 30 amp. But we should be able to pack everything tight into here in order to get our solid connections. These are quickly falling out of fashion, which is really good news because they are not amazing at all. There are far better solutions these days, especially for work like this. I could do with ones a lot smaller, but we'll make it work. There's no regulations to break here anyway because we've already broken them all. I bent the casing a little bit, by the way, of this power supply. It's only sheet metal, very thin. It'll bend back into place perfectly. Once the lid is on as well and it's all screwed together, it will be fine. I just need a little bit more room to work. It's out of the question taking everything out because these switches are not removable with screws from the back panel anyway. There's no point because we'd just take the board out and then we'd have the board flopping all over the place while all this is still on the back of the power supply here, so there's no point doing that. We don't gain a single thing. All we need to do is strip back these a smidge more. That is a beautiful thing. Okay, there's our connectors there available to us. Do you know, I should have thought a bit better actually. I should have crimped these together rather than trying to get both ferrules into this terminal block. That would have been a lot better. I was kind of imagining that I was going to have a three-way on each of the live and the neutral, and I was just going to have a nice yeah, three-way junction here, but obviously that's not the case with this. Okay, right then, that series of connections is done. Okay, so we've messed about with that a lot. So the first thing I want to check is, do we have any dead shorts? Because we've moved those connections on the switch quite a lot. Best way for us to check if we have any dead shorts is to, at both ends, do this. Okay, so no continuity between live and neutral, neutral and earth, earth and live, all fine. Then we do the same test on the back. Test meter, good. Meter still good. 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 And good. Now, let's do a real test. We are going to go in there and continuity. Continuity. And continuity. So we've got continuity on all three wires down to the second power supply. Next thing we need to do is ensure that there's going to be no strain pulled upon that at all. So for that, we are going to get another one of our cable ties, ensure there's some slack, quick pull test. Lovely. That's pulling on the unit as a whole now and not on the connections. Really glad we went for those bigger connections, guys, into that oversized connector block. Probably what would have helped with this is if I made a plan beforehand to do this properly, but we're just kind of winging it again. So we have made a terrifying Frankenstein power supply, and I'm going to show you guys what it looks like now that we have it back together. So what we've ended up with is our Fireball power supply, and as well as all the PC cables coming out of it, we have a mains AC cable coming out to support the the secondary power supply. So what we can do now is, as a final check, we can take our kettle lead, plug that in, and get our meter, and with this we can check our continuity through this power supply. So we can go earth continuity, good. Neutral continuity, good. Live continuity, good. And again, we have no dead shorts, which is obvious because we've wired them up separately, but it's still best practice to check. And again, continuity is still in place for this power supply. So, last thing we need to do is actually test it out with the other power supply. Now we've mounted that in the system, so let's get the system back up here. We will plug the Fireball into the mains electricity, switch it off. We will plug the new trailing cable into the Seasonic and turn that on. Okay, now we're going to remarry these two power supplies through the 24-pin connector. There we go. And now, all we've got left is to get our little power supply tester. Where's that gone then? Okay, are you guys ready? If there's any potential fire going to happen, it is going to happen now. Okay, we plugged in the primary PSU. You guys ready? 3, 2, 1, go. Sweet. We are absolutely running. we are that much closer to getting this PC finished. We have both of the unknowns completely answered. That was the mounting of the second power supply. Would we be able to fit it in the case? The answer is yes, it is successfully installed in the case. So that means we now have 2 power supplies in the same case, which is quite nice. And the second thing was the power supply mod to allow us to just use the one power cable that we've got here powering the PC. Was that a success? Yes, it was. So this is a perfect place to leave it for episode 2, I think, because episode 3 can now just be the build, everything else going into the system. We need to screw the motherboard in properly, and we need to add all of these crazy accessories that we've got to go in. There's all the drives, the mounting, the various funny little bits and pieces that we're going to do, and we need to try and cable manage this thing somehow. As you can see, the cables leave quite a lot to be desired, but I do have a little bit of a plan. There are a lot of cables to fit in here, but we should be all good. Before we finish the episode, however, I do have a few things to address. So firstly, you guys can see that we're sitting on the Windows 10 installer behind me here. I'm not putting Windows 10 on the system, I'm putting Windows 11 on the system. This was just the closest USB that I grabbed. I just wanted to kind of test, does it boot up into a bootable device? I know we went as far as the BIOS and we clicked around and we changed settings, that was all good. I wanted to just get into some kind of drive and prove that it does actually function, which it does, of course. So I've been sat in this installer for hours and hours. Another reason that I wanted to just sit in something was because I wanted the system to remain powered on for a long period of time. Not that I think it's going to burst into flames, but because we fiddled so much with it and we've been inside both of those power supplies several times, it was just nice to power it all up and make sure everything was indeed running safely and smoothly. Yes, the system is idle and things could be a different story when it ramps up, but it's all about testing things in stages. We don't want to just fill this system up, bung Windows on it, and then start running 100% CPU and GPU benchmarks straight away. So just having the thing powered up for now is a good step to trusting the system and seeing what it's capable of. So far, it's sat here behaving itself. Quickly as well, I do want to mention that I have plugged both of the case fans in, both the front and the back 80mm fans, into the nearest motherboard headers. That may change in the proper build in the next episode, but I just wanted to make sure that there was some airflow through that front fan with the power supply there, and there is indeed airflow. I can feel air coming over the top of the PSU. It's quite a lot as well, and it's nice and loud. It's got that authentic 80mm kind of sound going on, which is what I really wanted. It'll quieten down a fair bit when the panels go on, but we are going to add more noise with those 5¼ bay hard drive coolers as well, so that's going to be really exciting. A few other things to mention really quickly. In the last clip, the Fireball power supply, those of you with a keen eye may have noticed that the fan wasn't spinning. I have addressed that. I took the power supply back apart, and all I needed to do was move some of the cable that we'd added just out of the way of the fan ever so slightly. It was just physically stopping the fan from spinning. I've done that. I've tied it down a little bit neater, so now nothing is in the way of the fan spinning, so that is all good. And I've made sure that both power supplies, the casing, is fitting properly on each, because at various points during these videos, the casing has been misaligned when I've reassembled the power supplies quickly and enthusiastically. So both the casings are installed correctly and both the fans are spinning on the power supplies. Final thing to mention about power supplies in general is something that's kind of come to light as an idea since I started filming this series. Is there were a lot of suggestions about, as I said earlier in the video, getting a normal power supply and then possibly painting it, or getting a normal power supply and stripping the paint off to make it look silver, maybe pulling the sleeving off the cables so that it looked older than it was, all those sorts of ideas. But probably the strongest idea for doing this properly without getting too underpowered PSUs and you know, chopping them about and things, the best thing that I could have done, which is completely possible and probably what I will do if I have to replace this power supply setup, is find a power supply from a relatively modern pre-built system. Because if it's a high-end-ish pre-built system that contains a graphics card, it will be a relatively powerful PSU, and if it's a decent system, it will be a decent PSU, but it won't have gone through the finishing stages of an off-the-shelf PSU, so they are likely to be silver with not very pleasing to the eye cabling. Now, one thing to watch with that is you need to make sure it is an ATX system. Loads of pre-builds can be weird standards and power supplies would just completely not fit, but there are a good few pre-builds that are ATX. And I'm not talking systems that are kind of built by one of these companies that buys off-the-shelf parts and then puts them all together and resells the system. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking of more your traditional kind of OEM type systems that would typically contain something like a silver power supply. So maybe a HP system, maybe a Dell system, but they tend to be quite proprietary, although not always. But that would probably be the best path to go down, is look for a direct replacement for a PSU for one of those systems to power something like this. Then it would be not very pretty, it would look older than it is, and often not have a modular interface as well, which is something else that I didn't want. The final thing that I want to mention before signing off is my miscalculation of the 5 1/4 inch bays. I have an optical drive and 2 hard drive coolers. They are the 3 beige accessories that are going into this system. However, I do have a blank bay. So if any of you guys are watching, find something on eBay or have something lying around or any suggestions, then I'm all ears, because I can't find anything exciting to put in the 4th bay. Now, I know there are tons and tons of crazy accessories out there, but a lot of them tend to be more modern than this era. So we're looking at kind of black or silver stuff. And then they are quite hard to find as well in a specific search on eBay. Now, what I don't want is a hot swap drive tray thing. There's just no real need. They are very easy to come by in all colors, including beige. In fact, even Evercase sell them. So that's where you can sort of pull the drive out the front of the system, and it's got a backplane for usually IDE, but sometimes SATA. In a pinch, that would be a cool thing to put in, but I don't really need it, and I want this system to be useful. There are various sound card 5 1/4 inch bay adapters, like creative ones and things like that, but they are hard to find. Easy to find in black, harder to find the older ones, but they are out there. They're out there for quite a few sound cards as well, which would be cool because it would give you volume knobs and things on the front. I'm also looking for temperature stuff, but again, that came later. So if anybody knows of anything beige that I can put in that 4th bay, I am definitely all ears. Just send me a link, put it down in the comment section. I'll check that out, because when I finish this series, whether it's episode 3 or episode 4, depending on how the next episode goes, I want to have all bays populated. So I'm currently without one 5 1/4 inch accessory. That is it for episode 2. Thank you so much for sticking with me. This has been loads and loads of fun. I think when we're done, this is going to be a really, really groovy machine. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in episode 3.